Hello everyone and welcome to this ranking video for one of what you might term the bête noire of horror franchises, that is Children of the Corn. A franchise that, depending on who you ask, has never had a good entry. A franchise that is critically maligned as an example of essentially a one and done, and even then the first one was not particularly inspiring or exciting. I have perhaps a softer heart on it than perhaps most horror fans do, even though I admit that most of it is rubbish. And what I want to do is talk about the franchise today, and offer a ranking and talk about each of the films a little bit. Um, and hopefully sort of give you a sense of, if you want to watch some Children of the Corn, if you want to engage with a franchise that is now inexplicably 11 films deep, where should you start? Which are the best Children of the Corn films? Now, the metric I'm using, as you may have seen on the left of the screen there, is the fabled 1 to 5 corn cob ratings. Um, I think it's fair to say that none of the films are particularly objectively good. So what I'm going to do is essentially rank them against each other, and I'm going to rank them as Children of the Corn films. Um, so if I put something in 5 cobs, please don't think that's me saying it's a 5-star film. Stars and cobs are not equivalent, and that is one that we can very much have for the quote book. So let's begin. Let's begin with the original, the film of Children of the Corn, 1984, adapted from the short story by Stephen King. This film sees a couple, played the partner by Linda Hamilton, who travel to the town of Gatlin. They discover that all the adults are gone, and there is a dangerous cult of children who believe that everyone over the age of 18 must be killed, and so they aim to sort of survive this cult. I should say there will be some spoilers going on, and bear that in mind. I'm going to give a little summary of each film before I rank it. So if you sort of are really worried about spoilers, duck out there. So this is the film that started it all, and if you go by sort of popular consensus, this is the film really that is considered the best one. It's the adaptation of King's short story, and it does a lot in trying to bring a very short story to feature length. There are some great bits in this. So we see the sequence of the kids essentially wiping out the town of Gatlin. There's some excellent sequences, and there are excellent shots where the coffee supply in the town is poisoned. We see the villain of the film, or one of the villains, the preacher Isaac, played by John Franklin, staring through the window with a sort of a great degree of a very sinister expression. The kid, is very, very sinister. He forms a double act with another child called Malachi, who are sort of the human villains of the film. And these sequences in which the kids wipe out the town, that's a very strong opening. And by the time the protagonists appear, the film loses a lot of steam immediately. And they have the mystery element, but the mystery has already been wiped out by the fact that we know what's happened. The couple bump into a child, and they hit the child with the car and discover the kid has already been murdered. They look for help, wind up in the town, discover no one, and are pursued by the children. There are sort of things about dynamics between the children and the tension between Isaac and Malachi about how they should worship and respect the god of the cult, the famous He Who Walks Behind the Rose. But the tension is not overly there, I think. This is not a particularly thrilling film, I think. And it gets a bit daft as we go on. Isaac is sacrificed to He Who Walks Behind the Rose and killed via sort of a 1980s pixelation effect, and before being resurrected as a zombie. And there are explosions, there are jump scares, but none of it is particularly sort of inspiring. And I don't find the two central characters to be particularly interesting either. This is a film that has been remade twice. So we have 3 different versions, so you've got to rank them all. This is not my favourite version of it. I think, broadly speaking, it sets the tone, but it's not that enjoyable or interesting a film in its own right. I'm going to place it broadly in 4 corns. But on the sort of the lower end of that, you will see that I don't hold the reverence for this, and that I think a lot of people do. Let's leap ahead to 1992 and the second film, Children of the Corn: The Final Sacrifice. not quite as final as we expected. So this takes place. This is sort of a direct sequel to the first film, and it sees essentially the children sent to a nearby town. A journalist and his son travel to investigate Gatlin, and the kids are sort of repatriated. They're sent out to other families. Of course, where the kids go, he who walks behind the rose remains, and murders begin to happen again. This is, I think, markedly better. On sort of every metric, really. This is a film that sort of is campier, has more fun. It's sort of more horror-y and really works. So our new the leader of the children here is a kid called Micah, and a character called Mordecai. But there's sort of this real tension sort of set up in that the town is split on how to deal with the children. And the authorities have blamed Isaac in the first film. The remaining children claim to have amnesia. They don't want to talk. But there's a lot of tension with the local residents who, I think somewhat understandably, do not want to have a group of murderous children staying in their town. There's an older woman in particular who sort of leads against resistance and is sort of wiped out in one of the film's really quite effective kill sequences, in a death that I don't think you're going to see in horror particularly, in which she is wiped out by a house. I'll say no more. So our central characters, a divorced father who is a reporter, a guy called Garrett, and his teenage son Danny. Garrett is trying to sort of figure out how to sort of place himself back on the top. He's trying to revive his career. Meanwhile, Danny, because of his tension with his father, is being pulled into the cult. And the cult are working on him, trying to introduce him to He Who Walks Behind the Rose. And as this is going on, there is of a wealth of deaths occurring. Murders by corn. There is deaths by dirt. There is a sort of an excellent sort of death that is linked to a voodoo doll and a priest who is killed. And it attempts to expand the mythology a bit more. Garrett works with a professor who is a Native American, who sort of introduces some of the sort of the 90s pseudo mumbo jumbo representations of Native American folklore. But you will enjoy this film. So it's campier. It's campier than the first one. It plays it with a bit more fun. No more is this more fun than a sequence in which, rather amusingly, a woman in a wheelchair is sort of psychically yeeted across the road. It's really wonderful. I love it. It's more fun. It amps up the gore. It amps up sort of the backstory. And I think the central characters, the central kids, are scarier here than they are in the original. I think this is a sequel that does stuff better. I really do. Again, I think in terms of where am I going to rank it? That's very much the question. I think I would put this on the upper end of Four Corners as well. I think it is better than the original film. I really do. So I'm going to place it there in Four Corners, and we'll leap ahead to Children of the Corn #3, Urban Harvest. That came out in 1995. As this may suggest, we are shifting locations. So two of the brothers who are involved in the cult in Gatlin are taken to Chicago by an adopted couple. There is sort of a little humour as they adapt to city life, but then begin introducing some of the local residents to the corn. This is, I think, perhaps the strongest film we've seen thus far. So the two brothers, a character called Joshua and Eli, there's a little bit of a setup while they are in their original in Gatlin in the beginning, and then they're introduced to the city. They don't quite understand how the city works, and there is an interesting father character who sort of tries to look after them but can't really understand them. And they interact. They have lots of interactions with city folk. What I quite enjoy. So this there is all this sort of tension. As Joshua, there's this tension between Joshua and Eli in that Joshua essentially tries to adapt to city life. He tries to blend in. He tries to make friends. He tries to essentially leave his past behind him. His younger brother Eli is very reticent doing this. He starts sermoning to the Corn and sort of introducing Corn to Chicago. And this leads to a number of surprising set pieces in which Corn sort of features in, it sort of appears in his school. He manages to wipe out some people from his school. And he works on his adopted father, essentially giving him the business opportunity of selling magic corn. There are some excellent deaths in this. They really, really are. And it culminates in a sequence that is so sort of wonderfully campy, wonderfully bizarre, that I think it really works well, in which sort of Corn comes to Chicago and sort of a giant monster creature, a weird embodiment, monstrous representation of He Who Walks Behind the Rose, is summoned to the cult. This is really the epitome of it. Does the horror quite well, I think. I think the central children in this, and particularly the actor who plays Eli, whose name I forget, I find him quite frightening and charming in equal measure. You can sort of see how that works. Interestingly, also a cameo by Charlize Theron in one of her earlier roles. But it also does the campy elements really quite well. It's really quite fun. This one, I think it toes the line better than the other two. I'm going to say this, inexplicably, is my first 5 Corn of the franchise. And that's not me saying it's a good film. I'm stressing this very much so. But I think it does something different and really works quite well. So I would rank that higher. I would rank this higher than the other two. I'm looking at it now. I'm sort of vaguely tempted to shift the second one up to 5 Corn as well. But I'm not going to do that for the moment. What we're going to do is we are going to leap ahead. We're going to leap ahead to the 4th film, Children of the Corn 4, subtitled The Gathering. This film comes from 1996. So this features a young woman who essentially returns home to sort of help out her mother. This young woman is played by Naomi Watts. So sort of some big star power here. And then there is incidents around town as children start to fall ill, and then shift and become murderous. We reached the point, and you're going to see this a lot in quite a few of the entries that follow, where we don't really have that much new to add to the Children of the Corn mythos or plot summaries or anything of that description. Children of the Corn 4, there are sort of there's a sort of a zombie kid that's not particularly creepy, who appears in dreams and jump scares and stuff. There are complications. There are sort of plot twists and sort of questions about how some of the characters tie in to the cult in Gatlin. There are sort of a climax in which the Naomi Watts character confronts the children. But this one is sort of it's going off the rails here a little bit. There are good points. So Naomi Watts is good. There's a doctor character played by William Wyndon, I think playing vaguely a similar role to the character he played in Murder, She Wrote, which I love. Who sort of bring a sort of a nice charm and effectiveness. There's sort of a hint of sort of a sort of paternal-ish relationship between the two of them, which I think is really nice and really tender. And there are some decent kill sequences, but really, this is a film that doesn't do the horror stuff particularly well. And some of the tender bits, the relationship between those characters and the Naomi Watts character trying to sort of deal with her, support her mother who's got mental health challenges. But it doesn't dwell on them particularly long. Those are sort of the best bits, but those best bits don't appear particularly often. And it doesn't even tend to. It sort of it goes back to the original in that it is more straight up drama than it is campy fun. This could have been really campy fun, but alas, not campy fun. So I think if we're going to be honest, we have to say that Children of the Corn 4 is sort of towards the lower end of this thing. It's not going to be there alone for long, I suspect, looking at what's to come. I think I'm going to put it as a high 2 Corn. A high 2 Corn film. There are good bits to this. Don't get me wrong. There are good bits, but the good bits don't factor in too heavily. Sleep ahead. Children of the Corn 5. Fields of Terror. 1998. This is a film in which a group of college students on a road trip, they take a wrong turn and they wind up trapped in a rural town inhabited by a cult of children. Essentially bringing the Scream vibe to Children of the Corn, and it doesn't really work. Again, talking big name actors, well, big name. I'm talking actors you'll know. This one features an appearance by Eva Mendes. There are some good stars in the Children of the Corn franchise, it must be said. Not really given the material to work with, but some excellent stars nonetheless. This is Children of the Corn and also trying really to do the slasher routine. Again, it doesn't quite work. In that the elements here, you can't quite figure out how to mesh them together. There's sort of the elements of teen fun, and when one of the characters arrives, he's sort of making jokes and obsessing about a blow-up doll that he has in the car. There are sort of the teen dynamics, and then mixed with some of the cult things. So David Carradine appears as a pastor in the town. Slightly, it must be said, skewing the thing about this being a cult run by children, but there we go. And there are some hints as well. The Eva Mendes character is sort of essentially falling into the cult. There is a giant kind of, what's it called, like a corn silo that is linked to He Who Walks Behind the Rose. But this is quite an interesting film in that it brings very little that's new, other than the hint perhaps that a baby has been reincarnated as He Who Walks Behind the Rose. There are some excellent shots in the film, but the film is not that engaging particularly. None of the characters are particularly interesting. So again, I rewatched this a few days ago, and I'm struggling really to remember any of them, other than the two actors that I know, and that is the reason I know it. This, again, there are elements. This is the frustrating thing with this franchise, really, is that there are elements of the franchise that are quite interesting, that work quite well, that are quite effective. The central actress in this is perhaps one of the better ones, although it doesn't help that she comes immediately after Naomi Watts. But again, this is a film that misfires more than it fires, I would say. And so again, it's hard to rate it anything sort of higher than a 2 corn. It's not dreadful, like it's not boring. There are some decent kills, and it's not a total waste of your time, but I don't recommend it. And again, it's sort of the uninspired end of the franchise. On we go, continuing. Children of the Corn 666, Isaac's Return. So this takes us back. They're loosely a sequel to the first film, which sees the return of Isaac, as the title suggests, and once again played by John Franklin. He also co-wrote the script. There's not that much magic in the script, it must be said. The film takes place after, it's meant to take place, I think about 20 years after the first film, where Isaac awakens from a coma. Although he died in the first film, we sort of don't deal with that. A central character, again, another woman who happens to come to a hometown, and happens to wind up in the town, trapped for a period, and wanders around, meets some people, and meets a handsome young guy who's sort of a generic 90s guy. We'll come back to him later. Stuck in the town, trying to figure out sort of records of her birth, and has some sort of dreams of Isaac, not being particularly scary. What we eventually learn, what we discover is that the central character in this is meant to be the daughter of two of the children from the first film. Isaac reawakens from his coma and starts getting revenge on some of the people who helped the mother and this young baby escape, supposedly after the events of the first film. And then in what is sort of one of the weirdest shifts of the franchise ever, after the central character and this generic handsome guy essentially engaging in some lovemaking. It transpires that the handsome guy is meant to be a sort of an embodiment of he who walks behind the rose, and manifesting in a sequence that sort of casts him almost as a kind of sort of game show host. Um, the film really, really goes off the rails very, very quickly. And so it's a weird watch. Again, it's striking really that John Franklin sort of returned to the franchise and came up with a film that was so bizarre and so strange. And again, doesn't really do very much interesting. Sort of reinstates him, re-enrolls him with the cult, but does nothing particularly interesting with it. This is a film that is really confusing, and then what it does with He Who Walks Behind the Rose. There have been some sort of CGI misrepresentations of the character, but this is the weirdest representation of him throughout the franchise. And I don't love it. Again, it's so bizarre and so strange, and not even in a fun way. I think this film really has to be the first sort of one corn of the franchise, because it's bizarre. The kills aren't that good. The narrative is confusing, and it's not even particularly engaging to watch. Children of the Corn 666 is, I think, sort of the low of the franchise thus far. And will it be the only one to be a one corn? Who knows? Let's discover. So this was sort of a dreadful film, and with this we entered the 21st century. And we reached the 7th film of the franchise, Children of the Corn: Revelation. So this came out in 2001. This is a film in which an old lady, it begins with an old lady sort of being pursued, tormented, we don't exactly know, in an apartment building. And then some period of time later, our central character arrives at the building looking for the old lady, her grandmother. This is a building that has weird children. Children, again, who are sort of linked with corn. They throw corn at the windows, etc. There's a mysterious priest character. And it eventually transpires again that there are links between the children who are living within the building, some of the corn that they're growing, and the cult. Spoiler alert, I mean, you can probably see it coming, but the spoiler alert is that the grandma was part of the cult for He Who Walks Behind the Rose again, whom killed themselves, but then the grandmother decided to flee. Q, essentially kind of the same narrative of children trying to bring the young lady back into the cult. This is, again, such a baffling film, full of CGI corn, full of sort of children having this apartment who are sort of children, and they're ghost children, murderous corn children. The movie never quite figures it out. Again, this is another film that is baffling. It's a film full of random scares, random jump scares, random stuff, the mysterious priest, etc. But a lot of it never actually ties into the main story. It's one of those that is sort of, it's towing the line of so bad it's good, but is not. It doesn't reach good. It really doesn't. The links to the original film are so tenuous now it's untrue. Neither of the central characters are particularly interesting, be that the lead or be that a police officer who manages to discover a lot of things by some sort of very basic research and Googling. And the film really wants there to be shock. It really wants there to be shock in the idea that the grandmother was involved with the cult. But it's so sort of immediately apparent that it's hard to believe anyone could possibly be surprised. I'm gonna, again, this is gonna be joining the 6th film at the bottom of the rankings. I'm gonna put it below 666, not because 666 is particularly better, but just because it is more obviously Children of the Corn, because it actually links to it. There's a more cohesive thing there, even though it is wildly bizarre and how it represents it. So we stop there. We return to the original story again. Children of the Corn was remade in 2009. It was remade on the Sci-Fi Channel, and make of that what you will. It takes itself pretty seriously. It sort of takes the story properly seriously. And the couple, so again, it's the same narrative. A couple wind up in a town where all the children, where it's only children, all the adults have been killed, and attempt to survive. Many of the same events. We have them hitting the boy with the car and discovering he's already dead, winding up in the town and discovering that it is all empty. Some little corn icons and stuff. Many of the same beats. I think this one broadly works better than the original. And this is not a case of recency bias because there's a third remake that we'll be discussing later on. Don't you worry. The couple, there's a sort of more hostility towards the couple. So the movie takes place in 1975, and there's sort of hints of Vietnam. The husband character, Bert, is a Vietnam veteran. He's meant to be some sort of brash, rebel-looking character. He's in the NRA. He fought in war, etc. The wife is less of an interesting character. She, it must be said, is dispatched much earlier, should we say, than the husband. And the husband's put some proper fights. There's sort of the movie is not ashamed to sort of have him taking on kids and taking them out. The kids, he is vastly outnumbered. He puts up a fight. The main kids, so again, we have Isaac and we have Malachi. The Malachi character is quite threatening. We're introduced to them in a Zoom that is sort of equal measures bizarre and striking. The Isaac is no sort of John Franklin. I find him quite adorable in truth. And he wears this sort of giant's hat that's not particularly, he looks adorable. There's this wonderful sequence as well, which is sort of outside of the campiness. It shouldn't be. This movie is very serious and has camp bits. I mean, he stands on a roof and sort of throws a knife, this obvious CGI knife, into the arms of the hero character. It is wonderful. It's really good. There are some great sequences in there, so including a bit where they chase the husband to a cornfield, and then the town, and then all the children freeze in fear, and they try and save one of the children as well. And it sort of humanizes the Malachi character who stops the kid. There are hints of Vietnam flashbacks. There's sort of elements of sort of the cult sort of procreating and getting ready to wipe out some of the older members. The film loses itself somewhat within the ending, and Bert is trapped in the field, starts having flashbacks and seeing people wiped out and killed by corn. The element doesn't work that well. What I would say, though, this is quite interesting. In this case, it really contrasts the sort of the dysfunction of the couple to sort of how well functioning the community of the children are. The Vietnam subtext is perhaps a bit on the nose as truth, but again, it adds something to the original. It adds something to the story, and I think as a scholar could probably find some interesting things there. I might find some interesting things there myself if people want me to talk about Children of the Corn. I think this film is more interesting. It's more effective than the original. So I would say, in terms of sort of finding the Children of the Corn story, this is probably the better version of it. I would place this as a 5 corn film again. I think this is a more interesting variant. I really, really do. And so I would run with that as the essential story. Let's go on ahead. Children of the Corn Genesis, 2011. So 2 years later, this is a strange film. It really is. So this features a couple who essentially get lost, get stranded off the road. They seek help at the nearest house and encounter an old man and his wife. again, there's a Vietnam text here, and sort of the opening takes place with a kid returning home, um, and then we skip ahead to California in the present day. This is kind of a bottle film. There are only really four main characters and then a single child for much of the runtime. The child is locked in the sort of the shed. This is a Children of the Corn film, which rarely features children nor corn, which is quite a striking, interesting approach. It is again, it's kind of like the seventh film, and that there are moments of scariness here. But how they link that, this is sort of a horror film that is Children of the Corn in name, if not really in sort of any sort of obvious connected way. And for most of the runtime, there are some good scares. The central actor, the actress who plays the central female, and what's her name, Ali, is quite good, as is Billy Drago as the preacher. There's some interesting subtext here about foreigners. So he has a Eastern European wife, the preacher, and it's implied he is the Vietnam soldier in the opening. But a lot of this is sort of just a couple's drama, and with some daft moments, including a bit in which sort of a policeman is sort of punted into space by a sort of a psychic child. I kid you not, I'm not saying that. It culminates in a bizarre sequence in which the couple try and escape using shots from, I think, Bad Boys 2. And then the Ali character is brought back to the farm for some reason. It is a weird film. It's barely a Children of the Corn film. As a film itself, there are kind of good elements here, and things I like, things that I think are all right. But it's a weird one to rank because, as I say, there's not really any children, there's barely any corn. So how do you rank it? I think it's broadly effective. I'm going to put it on the lower end of two corns again. But this is just a strange film. It's a real outlier to a franchise that broadly is quite a lot of outliers anyway. Two more to go. We're in the home stretch, guys. Children of the Corn Runaway 2018, the 10th film in the Children of the Corn franchise. So this one follows one of the Corn called children as an adult. So in this movie, Malachi's girlfriend, so this is meant to be sort of based after the on one of the two Children of the Corn original films, destroyed the cornfields and then gave birth to a child that she had with Malachi. Years later, this girl, Ruth, is her son. They're driving around. They're trying to avoid the cult. She is trapped and compounded in a town and is forced to work a little bit. While she is there, she sort of having visions of a girl in a yellow dress that no one else can see. And she is convinced that she's being surrounded by the cult again, who want to claim her child for the cult. What is and then sort of murders start to occur. The girl in the yellow dress appears and starts killing some of the residents. It transpires, however, and I think this is quite an effective little twist, that she is the little girl. So she's been imagining herself as the child in the cult days. She kills, so she sees herself as the girl. When she sort of snaps out of it, she sees that she's covered in blood. And that one of the residents, a sympathetic character who is sort of a waitress in the town, is part of the cult trying to break her and to bring her son into the cult. This movie, I quite like this one. It's nothing particularly brilliant. It's quite a fun one, and it's quite nice really that it sort of brings in sort of the this sort of history of the adult dimension of it, and which the Isaac's Return tried to do but didn't do overly well, and this one brings in the question of sort of an adult survivor of the cult, by not focusing on the children particularly much. It introduces perhaps a nice little element of mystery. I quite like it. It's not that brilliant a film. The plotting though is markedly better. It tries to do something interesting, and although the value of the twist may differ, you may find it effective, you may not. I personally did, in part because I had now watched 10 of them of these films. I was not expecting any of them to be particularly to bring in any interesting surprises that far in. But I think it worked nicely. I quite liked it. And there are some good kills in here. A murder in a garage, a local resident of the town, the school's principal being killed. There are some great elements. I'm going to put it in the middle. So this is going to hold up the three corn part of the franchise. It's sort of in the middle. It's quite an effective film. It's more inventive than a lot of these films. But it's a franchise running on fumes. It really, really is. And then we're here, the last one, Children of the Corn 2023. So this is the 11th film and kind of a reboot. It sort of follows the original. But it takes a few swings, a few liberties, a few creative twists. So it tries to do something different, which I really, really quite like. It doesn't entirely land all of them, but there we are. So this takes place in a farming community. Again, the children are starting. The children kill a load of people and are sort of transplanted to a new town. The central character, who is sort of the leader of the cult this time, is a girl. She's called Eden, and she starts bringing in sort of the questions of agriculture and sort of the knowledge of he who walks behind the rows in her new town. Now the town, there is this discourse about synthetic GMOs, the crops are dying, rotting, and the adults in the town don't fully know how to respond to this. The mayor, it's implied, is involved with sort of big corn, etc. And trying to push the townsfolk to stop growing corn, to push them to take subsidies. The children are not happy with this, and they want the town to be sort of an agricultural community. And so then the children decide to essentially arrest all the adults, and then wipe them out, pretty much, is the thing. There are teenage characters who sort of serve as intermediaries, including our central character, a girl called Bo, who is sort of back in the town, who has a sort of a kind of sisterly relationship with the main villain, Eden. And as it goes, the children start to kill more and more adults. This is a weird film, so it tries to do something different, and it sort of tries to bring in some of the debates about green policies, about agriculture. It starts bringing in a bit of sort of MAGA Trumpian rhetoric and tries to make a point there. Not, to my mind, entirely effectively, but there we go. I enjoy, but I think sort of in terms of the threatening kids in this franchise. So the actress who plays Eden, she is called, let me see my notes, Kate Moyer. Is probably one of the better ones. There are good moments of gore here, there really are. But this is again, it doesn't do too much that's interesting. There are a lot of questions about this. When we see who walks behind the rows as a sort of a giant sort of CGI corn husk, it's daft, it's laughable, and it really, really makes you laugh. This is an interesting in that it evokes questions of generations, and it makes them more explicit than many of the other films have. It makes specific sort of the questions of green policy, and it makes the questions of children versus adults. By not immediately just wiping out the adults, by putting some of them on trial, by arresting them, etc., we're able to sort of hear some more of the arguments. But again, I don't love the film. It's a reboot that didn't need to exist, and it doesn't do really very much in the and it's hard to sort of tie in with. It's hard to sort of get behind because the town is so obviously dying that sort of the adult stance is clearly the correct one. I know the children have been indoctrinated, but there's no. Whereas in the previous Gatlins that we've seen, you know, the corn is thick and growing. This is not no longer an agricultural community, so it's hard really to get behind it. Then the CGI monster appears, and the ending is stupid. Now I'm not going to say less about the final scene, which doesn't really land. So there are moments, but not really enough moments to put it any higher than a two corn film. Where am I going to put it? Do I like it? I prefer Naomi Watts, really. I'm going to put it there. So there we go. So this is Children of the Corn. What a franchise. Somehow a franchise, despite the fact that there's probably enough narrative there to really, we could have stopped maybe 2-3 films in at the best. It's a franchise that vaguely doesn't work. It vaguely works. Sometimes it works, but vaguely, most often it doesn't. And there are infrequently, but sometimes some really interesting ideas that, had they been realized in a better franchise, had they been realized in a stronger script, had they been realized with better actors, they might have worked. But Children of the Corn is quite an interesting mixed franchise, I think, and one that perhaps deserves a lot of the flack it gets, but I think there are things to love here. I think so. This is my ranking. If you're going to give it a go, I suggest that looking at numbers 2 and 3. I suggest that looking at the 2009 remake is probably the way to go, and that will give you all the Children of the Corn you need. If pushed, have a try with Runaway, although I've sort of spoiled it. But yes, this is my Children of the Corn ranking. If you have inexplicably, like me, seen all 11 of these films, let me know what you think. And do you love them? Do you hate them? Are you indifferent to them? Let me know. I would very much be intrigued to hear your views on Children of the Corn.